Go.
Okay, so basically, I did the Black Dahlia. Her name was Elizabeth Short, and basically the case is about a woman named, an American woman who was found murdered in the American California on January 15th of 1947. Her case became widely publicized owing to the gruesome nature of the crime, which included the mutilation and dissection of her body. And she acquired the nickname of the Black Dahlia after she had died, as newspapers had appeared often nicknames, particularly lurid crimes, and the term may have originated from a film noir that was popular at the time called The Blue Dahlia. After the discovery of her body, the Los Angeles Police Department began an extensive investigation that produced over 150 suspects that yielded no arrests. And it was her case was the basis for numerous books and films, and it was frequently cited as one of the most famous unsolved murders in U.S. history, as well as one of the oldest unsolved cases in the Los Angeles. And to this day, it's kind of unsolved because there's no concrete evidence that it was who what they think it is, but we're pretty sure that there's some pretty hard evidence against one of the suspects. So basically, Elizabeth Short was born on July 29th of 1924 in Boston, Massachusetts, to Cleo Alvin Jr. Short and Phoebe May Sawyer. Short's father, he invested a lot of money into the miniature golf courses until his savings were lost in the 1929 stock market crash. And he allegedly committed suicide after that and left their family devastated. And the mother had to basically take in a couple jobs to help support their family. She moved to Miami at 15 because she had a lot of lung issues, so it was hard for her to breathe in the humid. It was hard for her to breathe in like the dry air where she lived in Boston. So she had to go to Miami to help her after she got lung surgery to help her breathe easier. She received a letter from her father. The mother did. I think when she was like 16 or 17, that he in fact did not commit suicide, that he was really sorry that he had left the family, but like he just like couldn't deal with it anymore. And so she moved to California with her dad. She was arrested on September 23rd for drinking at a local bar while underage, and the juvenile authorities sent her back to Massachusetts, but she went back to Miami shortly after. She wrote to her friends when she was a little bit older than this that she was to be married to a decorated army officer that she had been staying with at the time, but he died in a plane crash on the second plane crash because he was on a mission, so he sent a letter to her to propose marriage, and then like shortly after that he got in another plane crash where he just died to his injuries. And relatively close to her death, she was working as a waitress at a Florentine Gardens nightclub on Hollywood Boulevard. And there was no, like, she hadn't made any moves to try and become an actress, but there was she had mentioned quite a few times that she was interested in acting. So activities prior to her murder. On January 9th, 1947, she returned home to Los Angeles after a brief trip to San Diego with her boyfriend Robert Fred Manley, a 25-year-old married salesman who she had been dating. She was taken, and then she had a police encounter the night prior. So basically, this had happened like 3 days prior, and then Manley was like the last person to have seen her alive that like reported it. And so he was suspect number one, but he was ruled out because he had an alibi. But the night prior to her murder, there was police records that she had an encounter with the police, and she came up to this female police officer and reported to her that this man had threatened to kill her in a bar that she was at. And they went back to the bar and to go look for him, and they couldn't find him. So they kind of split ways, and she was like, "Okay, like, thank you for like helping me." And then she just kind of continued her night at the bar. And then a little bit later on, she was seen with two males and one female adult suspects. And she was driven to the residence. At some point when she was seen with these suspects, the officer had seen her and was like, she's with these like guys, and she's with these guys, and she's already worried for her well-being at this point. So she's kind of just like, hey, like, just want to make sure you're okay. She said she was fine. She said she was going to go see her sister. And so she let her go. And according to a 2024 article made by one of the suspects' sons, she allegedly went back to his mansion when she went with him. And so like the two suspects were allegedly, I think it's Dr. George Hodel and Frank Sexton, and an unknown female. The female was never identified really. I don't think they know who she is, but those are the people that she was alleged with. Well, her body was discovered on the morning of January 15th, 1947. She was found in a vacant lot on this west side of South Norton Avenue, midway between Coliseum Street and West 39th Street in the neighborhood of Merritt Park, which was largely underdeveloped at the time. She was discovered by a mother walking with her son. And she promptly reported it to the police. Her body was severely mutilated, and she was completely severed at the waist and drained of all blood, leaving her skin very peeled. The medical examiners determined that she had been dead for around 10 hours prior to the discovery, leaving her time of death either around sometime during the evening the night fired or in the early morning of January 15th. And her face had been slashed from the corners of her mouth to her ears, which is like a common thing called the Glasgow smile, which was basically, I searched it up because I kind of wanted to know a little bit about it, and it's basically it was basically a Irish, no, Glasgow's a it's a Scottish, it was a Scottish Irish thing where it was like, gangsters would do that to like threaten other gangs or people they had tensions with to kind of get them to like back off. And then she was posed in a suggested position with her like arms above her head and then her legs like up and like spread apart. Obviously I couldn't show that, but I thought I'd mention it. So autopsy and identification. There were ligature marks on her ankles, wrists, and neck, and an irregular laceration with superficial tissue loss on quite a few parts of her body. So that means she had been tied up at some point. She had been cut completely in half by a technique taught in the 1930s called the hemicorporectomy. Now now for that like procedure, people will still do it. It doesn't have a very high success rate with lifespan afterwards. But now if they perform that, they usually just cut your legs off. But in her case, during the 1930s, since it was so underdeveloped, they cut between the second and third lumbar vertebrae and just cut everything from the waist down off. So like that one's normally how they do it now. So they cut off this part of these part of your legs and then leave the rest. But because they realized like after a while, like it doesn't have a very big success rate with living afterwards, they kind of just stopped doing that. And they usually used it in autopsies because normally they usually try to like look at the intestines and stuff. There was very little bruising along the incision line, so that suggests that it had been performed after she had died. Her cause of death was determined to be hemorrhaging from the lacerations to her face and shock from blows to the head and face. She was identified after her fingerprints were sent to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and her fingerprints were filed for the 1940 records. Investigation. So basically, letters and phone calls were made to James Richardson, which he was an editor of the Examiner magazine, telling him basically how like, oh, you're doing so good, you're getting the coverage, like thanks for like covering the story. And he was kind of they were kind of like trying to track the records, but every single time they get any kind of like letters or anything, they doused in like gasoline. And like also her body was also doused in gasoline, or any belongings that they had found like around the crime scene had been doused in gasoline, so they couldn't find any fingerprints. And a suspicious manila envelope was discovered addressed to the Los Angeles Examiner and other Los Angeles papers with individual words that had been cut and pasted from newspaper clippings. So like those like weird ransom notes, but they weren't really ransom notes. They were just really praising them or like giving them little clues that like led them really nowhere. And then they also, in the envelope, they included like some of her belongings and then like some photos of the crime. And so they were trying to like fingerprint ID any of them, and they were doused in gasoline, so it really didn't do anything. And then the killer had allegedly sent them a suicide note at some point and said like, hey, I'm gonna be here at this time, and I like just can't stand to like be alive and like no, I like did this crime and stuff like that. And I'm like, because they had previously in these letters had claimed to want to turn themselves in. But then they were just like, I can't turn myself in, like I can't turn myself in. I'm too like nervous to do that. And like also like I'm just gonna go with this for the rest of my life. So like why? And so in that letter, he or she basically said, "Do not be concerned. I have waited for the police to capture me for the Black Dahlia killing, but have not. I am too much of a coward to turn myself in, so this is the best way out for me. I couldn't help myself for that or this. Sorry, Mary." And when they came to like the scene of like where the suicide was supposed to happen, they just found a bunch of clothing, like a pile of clothing, like on the beach, and it was just like doused in gasoline, so it really didn't help. Um, they didn't commit suicide. The person didn't commit suicide. But there was further letters after that. There was over 750 investigators on this case, and there were a bunch of false confessions and witness statements because they thoroughly into it. They were kind of giving a reward for anybody who had any like witness statements or any like confessions they had. And there was a lot of false ones. So at that point, they were kind of just like, this is annoying. Like, and so a lot of them were getting fined or getting arrested for their false confessions. Media. So basically, like, this is the media, like the people's reaction. So it was like a media circus. Like, everyone was jumping to try and get on this case because it was just so, because of the gruesome nature and just how big it had become. Her true cause of death was hidden from the public, so like they wouldn't like reveal how she actually died, which was like the cerebral hemorrhage. But also, what I thought was kind of evil and a little sneaky, one of the newspaper companies actually contacted her mother and said, like, hey, like she won a beauty contest, like, can I get a lot of like information on her? So they asked the mom a bunch of information on Elizabeth, and basically, once they got that information out of her, finally said, hey, like she died. So like come here and like we can like tell you details. And basically once she got there, it was kind of just like a play to get more information from her because they hid her from the police. Like they didn't want her to talk to the police in order to like preserve their scoop that they had gotten. And then also there was a lot of from the detectives and from a lot of people, they were thinking like because the cut had been so clean across like the body and because like it's not easy to cut between like your spine. They thought there's probably a surgical student who had done this, or at least or someone that's in like a medical field. So suspects and confessions. George Hell and Frank Sexton are the main suspects, and recently, 2024, actually January 1st of 2024, George Hodell's son, Steve Hodell, actually put out a whole entire like timeline and blog post of like the timeline of like her death and then like what probably happened and then his father was most likely one of the main suspects. He was also a surgical. A lot of people said it couldn't be him because he was like unpracticed in like surgical procedures such as this. But his son had been like, hey, like no, he'd actually performed like 12, like he'd been in on a 12 surgeries here, like these many surgeries here. So like he was well practiced and well performed. He'd also helped with a lot of autopsies when he went over to somewhere in South America. So they were like highly unlikely that like he wouldn't know how to do something like this well. And then Fred Sexton, he's kind of just the friend. So we're thinking he's like the second suspect that helped lead her to his house. And then they committed all the acts of violence against her. And then they were thinking that they probably did it somewhere abandoned. Either there, they did the crime there. When she died, they took her somewhere else, did all the mutilations, and then left her where they did. So no one would like have like a clear area or path like they know to follow. And then also, investigators had wiretapped George Hodell's home and obtained record conversation with him with an unidentified visitor saying, supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead. They thought that something was fishy. Anyway, now that they figured it out, killed her, maybe I killed my secretary. And so he also, the son also alleges that he thinks he killed a secretary and then he also killed a young girl because he was and they think that he killed the secretary as well because like she knew about it. So he had already been like suspected of a couple murders, but they didn't have any like solid evidence on him, so they couldn't really get him arrested before he died. And then Janice Knowlton, this was another suspect, and she also made this confession, but she claimed that she had witnessed her father, George Knowlton, beat Short to death with a claw hammer in the detached garage of the family's home in Westminster. She also published a book called Daddy Was the Black Dahlia Killer in 1955. But her sister basically came out and was like, yeah, these claims are false. Like I was actually there. And like she's also a little bit mentally unstable. And so like her claims are probably false. And also she alleged that her father had raped her at some point, and so she was like, yeah, that never happened. So her claims were shot down. Potentially
Gotta
related,
get going a little.
this is the last one.
Okay.
So some potentially related crimes would probably be the Cleveland Torso murders. It was like some murders. There was a link between the short murder and the Cleveland Torso murders because the LAPD investigators initially discounted the connection, but evidence implied that like one of the former suspects, Jack Anderson Wilson, had probably been could be a suspect considering like the nature of these crimes as well and like the torso aspect of it. And then there are a link between the lipstick murders, which was basically a girl, the murder of a 1946 Suzanne Degman in Chicago. Evidence includes that Short's body was found in Norton Avenue and similar handwriting on the ransom note, so people thought maybe that there could be a connection there. And then lone woman murders, there was they thought maybe there could be a single unidentified killer, like just people in the area, so like maybe there was a serial killer and she wasn't just like special and like her case just happened to be one of the more recent ones. And my personal anecdote, I think that's really crazy. And the way that she was found and like probably what she went through before she died was probably insane and scary. And then the motive, like I just like can't actually think of like why someone would want to do that. Or like I can't think of anybody in the past, like based on the research that like would want to kill her other than like maybe one of like the wives, but none of them came out. And that's it.
You think it was Georgia Val then?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's into. Yeah, it was a big deal, big story. And, yeah, the pictures can't show. Yeah, they're pretty horrific. Any other questions? All right, very good job. That's good. Okay, who's gonna, Nicholas, ready? Got it here. Not coming up. Okay, then we move the mouse over. All right, go.
So White Man's Phoenix, it was this like manuscript that was found in like on a small island in the Mediterranean. The island was part of Italy, Argy's castle. It was owned by a lot of people, from like 15th, like 17th century all the way up to the modern day. Currently it's in Yale, in the archives. I forgot what, serial number was it's located in, but, well, um, what people, what we think it was used for is pharmaceutical, herbal, astrological, um, like feminine health, because there are pictures of like herbs, sounds, astrology, and but the personal and like women, like a lot of like artwork of women. I can't show it because they're
I get it.
we don't know like what language it's in. But I found 10 people translated it. Closest like got to translating it was 30% from Old Turkic. And like one of the theories that, well, that it doesn't follow Zip Islam. Some of the more theories is that it's somehow this letter-based cipher. There are hoaxes with it. Like it's some like local language that we never just found before. What I think, it probably won't be ever translated unless people find like more documents, artwork that have like the same language in it.
And so how big was it?
Page wise, it was over like 200 pages, 210. Pretty lengthy.
And kind of some kind of science base, right?
Yeah, I'd say it's kind of science based.
Pharmaceutical,
Yeah, so like definitely like medical field-ish.
And what else? It was from the 14th century, is that what you said, 1400s?
Yes.
So they have deciphered a little.
Yes, but not like the whole complete thing. And it's only like certain words being able to be translated, some not. Like in total, there's like 300 words translated.
We just have little bits and pieces. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's a lot of really neat stuff, but I know there's also stuff we can't show. We kind of get that. That's the nature of the beast. Any other questions? All right, good. All right. Very good. All right. So. We'll have next year. Trying to load it up. Come on. Why is Peter out again? Everyone's out again. So Corey, do you want to go? Sure. I don't know why yours doesn't come to them. It froze somehow. Okay. Sorry about this. Fun with computers. It's coming. Now I gotta go. I had to go online. Should work. There we go.
Okay, so I did the title on the notes. So the explanation, so it was Chicago, Illinois, and to, it was between September and October, and there was Tylenol that was tampered with, and they put cyanide inside the, capsules. There were 7 total victims, and there were only 2 suspects, but the killer is still unknown. So the victims were Mary Kellerman, she's 12 years old, Adam Janus, who was 27, Stanley Janus, which was Adam's brother, he was 25, and Teresa Janus, she was 19 years old, she was married to Stanley. And then there was Mary McFarland, she was 31, Paula Jean Prince, she was 35, and Mary Reiner, who was 27 years old. So Mary Ann Kellerman was 12 years old. She died on September 29th of 1982. So that day she told her friends she was feeling good, and they gave her one capsule of Tylenol. And later that morning, at like I think it was like 7 in the morning, they found her dead on the bathroom floor. Or they found her unconscious at the bathroom on the bathroom floor, and she died at the hospital. And this was the first case, so the doctors thought that she had a stroke. And then there was Adam Janus. He was 27. He died on the exact same day, around the same time. He had a few children, and he dropped them off at school, and then he stopped by a pharmacy to grab some Tylenol because he wasn't feeling good, and he called out of work. He was a postal worker, and he took 2 capsules, and he was found dead later that day. Stanley and Teresa came home, and they found out that Stanley found out that his brother died, so they went over to the house, because I think a couple of their family members were over there, and they both like came down with like a pool, and they each took 2 capsules of Tylenol from the same bottle that Adam took, and they died shortly after that. And then Mary Reiner, she was 27. She died on the same day as well. I think like 2 days prior, she given birth, and she took Tylenol for the pain. And her 8-year-old daughter, I think her name was like Michelle, died right in front of her. And then Mary McFarland, she was 31 years old. She died on September 30th. She was a single mother with 2 young sons, and she died at work in Illinois Bell in Lombard. She was working and she had a headache, so she took Tylenol, and she died right after her. And her brother was found. When there was Paula Jean Prince, she was 35 years old. She was a flight attendant. She died on October 1st. She had symptoms of a cold after a long flight, and there was video surveillance of her going to a Walgreens in Chicago, and they found her dead in her apartment. I think like a day. And then the suspects were James William Lewis. He had previously been accused of sending a letter to Johnson and Johnson demanding like $1 million to stop the cyanide murders. He was later arrested and was also found to have previously owned a poisoning book. He pleaded not guilty to the poisonings, but he did admit to writing the letters to get money. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison for extortion. And then he did not, he was not found guilty of the one who murdered 7 people. And then there was Roger Arnold. He was a dog worker at Jewel Osco in Melrose Park. And he had told police officers that he had cyanide on him. And a bar owner, Marty Sinclair, he reported that Arnold had been like talking about killing people with white powder. He'd also like worked with many of Mary Reiner's father. He had worked with Mary Reiner's father at a warehouse, and Arnold's wife had been treated at the hospital across the street from the store, which Reiner had bought her Tylenol. And Helen Johnson was the one who was investigating the murders, and she had found that there were 6 capsules missing from. It was the James family, so there's 6 capsules, so they each took 2 capsules, and then they had like pot carts that were going around each neighborhood, and like on loudspeakers they were saying they don't take any medication until further notice, and that they took all medications off shelves until they could figure out what was going on.
Who was Helen Jensen again?
Helen Jensen, she was an investigator. She was just investigating like the murders.
Is she a police investigator or kind of a private?
She was like a private.
Yeah.
And then so there were multiple copycat killers. They're like throughout the years. So copycat killers are just like people who copy famous murders and do exactly what they did. So they tampered with the Tylenol. So the Tylenol bill was passed, which makes it a felony to tamper with medication. And safety seals are required on all medications. So like if your medication doesn't have a safety seal, don't take it. And then resources.
And but they still have no idea.
They have no idea we did it.
And Ronald, and none of them did he come close. One more thing I wanted to ask, when was it, I missed something when I was writing this down. What was the difference between when Kellerman was murdered and Prince? What was the time?
So what was the second person?
The first two, the first and the last person killed, like how soon,
So,
October?
Mary Helen, she was murdered on September 29th. And then Prince, she was murdered on, October 1st. So it was like a 2-3 day difference.
Go back to the first one. Just now want to see.
So 29th and then Prince.
Yeah, so it's all happened so fast.
There was like 3 Marys, so it's like,
Ah. I can still vividly remember this. And like scared to get Tylenol, scared to get aspirin, scared to get anything. And you notice now they don't have like, they used to have caps, if you could open it up, that's gone now because of the Tylenol bill and the safe. Yeah, I was scared. Any questions about this? This was a big deal. All right, good job. All right. I always forget how close it was because I just remember, it seemed like it was going for months because, well, you know, they talked about it in the news all the time. Oh, it's a big deal. Lloyd, want to go? Give me a sec, I gotta put yours online. I don't know what happened, but. What did you do to the internet? Give me one sec. Okay,
I did the Tunguska explosion event. It was in June 30th, 1908. Either meteoroid, asteroid, just a giant rock, entered the atmosphere and over. I don't speak Russian. Over the Tunguska River, pretty unpopulated area, and it's in the Russian Empire, so. So the closest human things like recorded, it was a tribe near Lake Baikal. Lake Baikal is actually. They said they saw a bright blue flash. And then there was like a heat wave that blew past them, and then it took 15 minutes for like the sound wave and then the blowback to hit them. It was pretty big, and then they said the lighting in the sky was bright for days afterwards. Like it never turned to night again for like a week. The explosion registered across seismic stations all across Europe and even the US, Germany, UK, all the way. So Jakarta now, or it's called Batavia because it's the Dutch East Indies, but all the way down to Indonesia. It was registering under seismic sales, and DC also. Like it was massive. Yeah, right. But all across, like there were certain parts of Europe that didn't get as bright, but like all across Eurasia, so like China. There was some in like Turkey. They thought like there was still brightness even there. It wasn't near as bright as it was in Central Russia, but it was bad. So I couldn't really find the exact idea of like how big, but it was a 3 to 50 megaton like nuclear bomb pretty much that went on. It was believed to be 50 to 60 meters wide, so 160 to 200 feet, so like almost a football field wide. It was huge. Yeah, so like I went with the general estimate. They said 15 megatons, which is still powerful, more powerful than both nukes that were dropped on Japan. So it's like one of our smaller nukes, pretty much, is what exploded. They knocked over 80 million trees. Like it just wiped them out. Like I couldn't find very many good pictures, but the ones I could, they were just stripped and black and flat for like miles. Yeah, so there's a 5 mile area now in Russia that's just like devoid of life. So like I'll show you the trajectory kind of, but the way it came down, it kind of just all of it's like there's grass now growing there again, but for like 50 years it was like just dead. Yeah, so done square kilometers was just gone. Um, there's not many like human accounts. They believe 3 people died to it, like 3. I don't know why. They think there was the native people in the area. It's super underpopulated at this time, so like not, it just destroyed trees. Like no settlements were damaged, no nothing crazy, just trees. Also that's what the believed size of the meteoroid was, so like that's a plane. And then a few other meteoroids that were, yeah, it was pretty big. So there was a few scientists that didn't really do any, like, they didn't try to discover anything until about 1921. Leonid Kolik, he put together like a team of scientists and tried to like track and find whatever they could figure out. There wasn't much. He spent 6 years trying to figure out what happened. There was a lot of different theories, but like the most common ones that the giant meteoroid came down and then hit the Earth. There's a few that were like it was an airburst, like it exploded over the land, and then like the shower came down. So like it exploded, like it was believed to about like 100 meters above the ground. It exploded, just came down, kind of like a shotgun across the land. So there, it's those are the 2 most common ones. Um, Again, and then similar scientists in the 60s, 70s still tried, like across the Soviet Union, were trying to figure out. They could never find a like solid main idea. They just know there was a massive explosion that did a lot of damage. There's a few other theories. So yeah, so I got 10 miles to 100 meters. There wasn't really a like happy medium of like where it would have exploded, but it probably like see like the area that's like it just flattened the area.
So,
And
trees
I,
everywhere except for that.
yeah, it goes on for like a few more months. Yeah, you can see the trajectory. So that's the hypothesis where it exploded, and then you can see like there's different impact craters, like of chunks like that's deeper and like more destroyed. And the first like the epicenter, and then it just like, and there's like some ideas that like rolled, like it peeled ground with it and rolled. There's also much. There was also some exploding above the surface in Chelyabinsk in 2013. There was a way smaller meteoroid that exploded over the city, and like it was such a downforce it destroyed like tons of windows and injured like 1,200 people just because of falling glass. So like a major Russian populated city, and it just like, and it was way smaller. It was only like 10 meters wide versus like yeah, the glancing hypothesis. So it's like pretty much hit and shot off back into space. So it like hit, it went off. Like that one wasn't very realistic because if it had enough gravity come in, it would have gone back out. But also the geovisible. So it was believed it was a super small rock that came down, and there was like a bunch of gas pressure built up under the surface of the earth, pretty much, and it hit and caused like an explosion, which I wasn't entirely. There wasn't much on it. They just kind of was like it could have happened. It didn't really make any sense. And then there was a book. So there was a few authors in the late 40s, like 1946. There was a guy like, it could be a black hole. Didn't really give much. I tried to read the story, but it was in Russian and I couldn't find much like translated. Didn't really make any sense. And it was like, there was one that was a joke, and then one guy that was like serious. He thought there was like a black hole or an alien invasion. I mean, they're still there, so I don't think it's an alien invasion or a black hole. They still don't fully know. I'm just gonna go with the main idea where it like hit and just exploded.
Noticing the trees.
Yes, that went on for miles. Like there wasn't a very good picture of like they couldn't really get a picture of the epicenter until like I think 1960 was the best one, but by that point there were still trees. Like life was starting to come back. But there's no way it was pretty crazy. And then I also did the Bermuda Triangle as you asked.
Yep.
I'll just do it really quickly. The kind of whole idea is like ships and planes and everything starts, disappears magically because there's some evil force or something. So I did like 3 of the like kind of first big ones. So 1880, the HMS Atlanta, it was a British like cruise ship kind of like for the time. It wasn't really it's on the website. It was pretty much it was leaving Bermuda to go back to England, back to Norfolk, and it like disappeared off the coast like 20, 30 miles off, and they couldn't find it. So they're like, oh my God. And it was like a big news story across the world. The USS Cyclops, so the one on the right, that was like it was like a yacht pretty much. And it sailed from Bermuda and was found abandoned off the coast of North Carolina in 19, oh no, that's 1912. So the Cyclops oh, okay. So the Cyclops was a ship they were using for World War One. It was like a supply ship,
Yeah.
and it was loaded with this magnetic ore that like sunk it pretty much, but they said it's because of the Bermuda Triangle or somehow they had three of the same ship and they all sank the same way. It's because of the magnetic or it sunk the ship because they're so heavy. But they, oh yeah, and 3,600 people died. It was the largest non-combat like loss of American naval life because of the war that just sunk. And then the Carroll A. Deering was the yacht. It was abandoned. They thought it was because of communists or a plot to like overthrow the government for some reason. There was a few crazy ideas. They thought it could also be aliens. They were abducted.
No one on it, just floated.
Oh, well, it was like crashed into like a sandbar, pretty much, like off the coast, like kind of by the barrier islands, and it was. I'm pretty sure they abandoned ship because they ran out of food.
Yeah.
So, and then, like, so some of the explanations was like paranormal activity, like aliens or sea monsters, or I mean, there's more reasonable ones. So sometimes just because there's like a magnetic shift a little bit, it can kind of mess with compasses. So that could be one reason. The Gulf Stream that I talked about picture. So like obviously with hurricanes and stuff, the way the currents flow, it can kind of mess your ship up. And the wind patterns too can also mess up airplanes. There's a few airplanes that I mentioned, but it's just human error. That's a pretty normal one. I mean, humans can mess stuff up pretty easily. Violent weather, obviously hurricanes, pretty common, especially during the time of year, like June to October, hurricanes. And then methane hydrates, so they're like these like underwater volcanoes pretty much, and they can kind of spew like they again methane and other gas just like bubbles that can like cause the water pressure to switch and that can sink a ship pretty quickly because the water pressure like ruins ballast tanks and stuff and it sinks the ship. So that's a good possibility of why other ones. There's one in that area, like a pretty big one. There's other smaller ones. They're all across the globe. And that's the yellow ones are methane hydrates, and then the white ones are like partial ones. So they're all across the globe, and they're also good for like source of oil and natural gas. So that would make the most sense for why things sink because they're pretty common in that area. And then
Well, so two things. First, you think it was its explosion?
yeah, it was when it hit the ground. Because the way the impact crater is, it looks more like hit, not like explosion, than a bunch of smaller fragments hitting. So
Yeah, that seems to be.
yeah, it makes the most sense with like the ground, the way it was destroyed. Because like there's a crater and then like it kind of like funnels up because then like the debris spreads. Yeah, it doesn't really make sense because if it exploded over, the impact crater should be relatively similar. But the way it just and it took out like I think it said like 500 like feet of dirt was like chucked in the air, like a nuke, pretty much. I mean, moved a lot of earth.
Now, one thing I was gonna ask, did that thing was so big? Was there any instance of, did they notice the temperature dropping?
So there was some crop failures across Russia for a few years because it was right after the Russo-Japanese War, and there was already like that was another big thing why Russia was kind of falling apart at that time. Just it caused like a famine across central Siberia. It was more just like it just blocked out some like the nuclear winter theories kind of what it did, but it was only one, so it wasn't as bad. It messed with some across like Kazakhstan and stuff.
Yeah.
So it wasn't. I mean, it didn't cause like huge famine, but it's still famine.
And then it's aliens and the devil.
Yeah, and black holes, like the black holes.
And, all right, good job. Thank you for getting the different vote. Yeah, there's actually no more ships sunk there than anyone else.
No, it's
All right, so we'll go tomorrow. And who in here would like to go first tomorrow? Okay, give me a second. Yes. All right, I gotta close up now for some reason. Frozen. I tried to load the Tylenol murders and it froze. Oh, I'm still recording. Everybody say goodbye. That was sincere.